Hi, Janeites. If you're listening, please follow and subscribe. It really helps to grow the podcast and for me to bring you more episodes. Hi, Janeites, and welcome to episode 20 of the What the Austen podcast. Myself and Anne are back, and we're continuing our Disney villain times Austen villain journey. We've already covered 3 novels so far, and we focused on Pride and Prejudice, Mansfield Park, and Sensibility. And it was really fun, actually. We had some really we had ones that were like a little bit more obvious, like a Gaston and Wickham match, but then we also had like more nuancy ones, which I thought were really good as well. And we were both kind of able to surprise each other. Did you have a favorite match?
I think mine actually goes along with that. It was the ringmaster from Dumbo and Sir Thomas Bertram. I just felt like that was when I made that connection. I blew my own mind, kind of thinking like, wow, there's a lot of similarities there, even though it just didn't seem obvious at all on the surface. So that was a lot of fun.
Oh my gosh, I actually love that one. That's actually so cool. I think one of the ones that I thought was really good as well. I believe you made this one. It was between Mrs. Norris from Mansfield Park and I can't remember her name, but Aunt something in Lady and the Tramp.
Oh yes, Aunt Sarah.
Yes, in Aunt Sarah, and how she like fawns over the cats, and it's really similar to how Mrs. Norris fawns over Mariah and Julia. And I was like, wow, I actually think that's maybe even a stronger match than Lady Tremaine and Mrs. Norris, because I was like, there is so many similarities there. And Mrs. Norris is really realistically should be on the sidelines. Like, she shouldn't be like such a significant person in the grand scheme of things, because she's like just like a relative who's come to stay forever. And that's the kind of the same as Aunt Sarah. Like, it's someone that shouldn't be significant, who has such an opinion of themselves that they kind of infiltrate the story.
Yeah, exactly. That's interesting. What was the favorite one though that you came up with from yours?
So I think my favorite match that I made was Mr. Collins and the Duke of Weselton from Frozen.
Yes, I love that. That was a really good one.
Yeah, absolutely. So the novel we'll be covering today is Emma, and I'm looking forward to hearing your matches for this one. I definitely picked some really interesting and exciting choices this time. So yeah, I'm really excited to tell you. Okay, so the first one on my list for Emma is Mr. Elton. So Mr. Elton is I think a lot of people are familiar with Emma, but just in case you're not, Mr. Elton is the vicar in the village. He is who Emma originally believes that Harriet's going to marry, and she thinks they're in love, but it actually turns out Mr. Elton was always interested in Emma and throws one of those really awkward proposals at her where she's shocked and thinks, I thought you were in love with Harriet. He then goes on to marry someone who's awful, Mrs. Elton, and he all around turns out to be not such a nice guy. Like, at the start, he's quite charming, and I think that's why Emma thinks, oh, we have a great match for Harriet. But then when he doesn't get Emma, who was in fact his intended, he turns pretty nasty.
Yeah, definitely.
I'm calling him a villain.
Scary. Yeah, he's definitely a villain. I definitely think he's a villain. He's really mean about Harriet too, like just how callous he is about her because she isn't good enough for him. And it's just like, just the way that he pretends to be so nice to her because he thinks that she's Emma's friend and it will gain him points with Emma. And you're just like, wow, like, it's not even that he didn't like Harriet. Like, he literally could care less if, she was killed by those gypsies in that scene. It's like he could really care less if anything happens to her because she was just a means to an end.
That's awful. But I'd love to hear your Disney villain comparisons for Mr. Elton.
Well, I feel like the obvious one for him is Hans, but I feel like I want to use Hans for a lot. So I actually kind of focused on one that I saw with Mr. Elton and Mrs. Elton sort of together. I really liked the evil queen and the magic mirror. So I guess it's actually 2 characters. So it's sort of like 2 characters that go together because They're both really vain and obsessed with being better than Emma, and the queen is vain and obsessed with being better than Snow White. And I feel like Mrs. Elton is kind of like the evil queen, and Mr. Elton is the magic mirror who reflects back to her, you know, like, I've chosen this wonderful wife, and you are the most beautiful. You're the fairest of all. You're more fair than Emma, even though that's not true. So I thought that that kind of worked as a really good duo together.
I love that. That's so good. Oh my gosh, what a way to kick things off. That's actually awesome. I do not have that on my list because that's really cool.
Okay. That's pretty much my main one on the list because I just liked it together so well. I could see the whole Hans thing. I definitely think that works. There's probably some others that work, but I just think you think of Mr. Elton and Mrs. Elton as a duo, you know, as a set. They're always traveling around together, and you think of the evil queen and her magic mirror together. So and I definitely think while Mrs. Elton isn't doing anything as evil as the evil queen or like trying to kill Emma, she's trying to kill Emma's reputation in a way by kind of like taking it over to be the lady of the village that everybody adores the most. Just kind of like the queen wants to be the most adored compared to Snow White. And so just the little things that she does to undermine her, it's sort of the sneaky equivalent to baking an apple pie to poison her because she tries to be really nice to her and sweet and like pretend to be this like really great person. Or maybe even, I can't remember if she ever needs her help, but or pretends to need her help, but she definitely is always there trying to sneakily put sugar metaphorically on everything to make it seem like she's a good person, but she's not.
I know. I feel like the closest to that is when she's like saying to Emma, she's like, we should start this music club together as leaders of society. We should like do this.
Yeah.
And Emma's just there like, please no. I don't want you in my life. Oh my God.
One of my favorite parts of the whole book is when she keeps calling, Mrs. Elton keeps calling Mr. Knightley Knightley. And then Emma is so upset about it. Like just the way Emma has this like kind of ramble in her head that Jane Austen lets us see is just, that's probably one of my favorite books in the entire, or not favorite books, favorite parts in the entire novel.
No, I totally agree. When she's like going, Knightley, what's she calling him Knightley for? Like she hardly knows him. That's honestly absolute gold dust. But I feel like that's actually such a good way to show Mrs. Elton's character and what she is like, because she is that person that would think, actually, I'm this person in society. I can be over familiar with people because I think I'm at the same level as them. And the rest of us are like, you're not at the same level as Mr. Knightley, friend. Like, no. Please, no, settle down. But it's so funny because she just has that perception of herself. And I think like what you were saying about the queen as well is the queen kind of tries too hard. And I think that's the same as Mrs. Elton. Like they try too hard to be something that they're not, and it shows.
Yeah, exactly. And while Emma is not in any way like Snow White, I do think the dynamic is very similar.
Yes, I love that one.
Although I would love to see a showdown between Emma and the evil queen, because Emma would not stand for it at all. She would not eat that pie.
Oh my gosh, like can you imagine? I would be like, I'm sorry, I can't eat this. She'd be like me. She'd be like, I can't eat gluten. I'm sorry, please can you take that back? Like or she turned up wearing apples, she'd be like, I'm sorry, I only take the green, like kind. This is red. I can't have this. I'm sorry.
Exactly. So and then
funny.
Emma would probably give the pie to someone else who was poor, thinking she was doing a good thing and like feel really good about herself. And then like the person would die and she'd be like, what have I done?
Oh my gosh, that's literally that would happen. That's so funny. Oh my goodness.
We need to do Jane Austen Disney mashup fan fiction where we just rewrite all of the stories and talk about how they would go a little bit differently if certain characters were in them.
Oh my gosh, wouldn't that be so funny? Honestly, kills me. Did you have anyone else on your list then?
I did not, no, because that was my main one that I came up with.
No worries. So I took a slightly different approach and I did keep them separate. So, but I do agree there's like the people that come up quite a lot, like Hans and I've got Gaston on my list for Mr. Elton. Mm-hmm. So I'll just say like, I genuinely just put him on my list because the fact that he's vain, he assumes Belle would want to marry him despite no encouragement, very similar to Mr. Elton, assuming that Emma would be interested in him, which makes no sense whatsoever, but there we go. And so that was just like a brief thing that I was like, I really wanted to bring that in. But my closer connection that I got was Lawrence from Princess and the Frog.
Oh,
If you don't know who Lawrence is from Princess and the Frog, because he is a little bit more of an obscure character and can be forgettable in many ways. But he starts out as Prince Naveen's servant. And he's
yes.
kind of a little bit on the chubby side, and he kind of resents the fact that he is a servant. And so when Dr. Facilier comes in with all his voodoo magic and he's like, I'm going to give everybody what they want, he kind of jumps at it, and he actually ends up turning into Prince Naveen, and Prince Naveen turns into a frog. So
That is so good. This is so good.
So I thought he was quite similar to Mr. Elton in the sense that they will go to great lengths for money and status. He's a little bit slimy and pompous, a little bit like Mr. Elton. And he thinks he deserves the best of things. And I think that's very much Lawrence. Like he believes, like he's envious, not jealous of Prince Naveen. He believes that he deserves it more than him. And I think that's very much like a Mr. Elton thing. Like he thinks he deserves power, status, wealth. And also I thought another connection as well would be that he wants to marry a rich young lady. And obviously in Princess and the Frog, he wants to marry Charlotte. And that's very much like Mr. Elton wanting to marry Emma, because Charlotte's like the daughter of like the richest person in New Orleans. And
Yes.
yeah, and he's like, he thinks, oh yeah, I'm gonna do this. Obviously he has to put on a bit of a facade, so he has to turn into Prince Naveen, and Mr. Elton in the same way has to put on this facade of actually being a nice person when it turns out he really isn't. So I thought that was like a connection. I was there, I was like, yeah, I can kind of see them being like a little bit similar. So yeah, Lawrence was on my list for Mr. Elton.
I love that. And I really, really like that. I didn't think of that one at all. I think it fits perfectly. And I also think that it even fits with Charlotte and Mrs. Elton, even though Charlotte is really, really sweet. They're both kind of over the top and silly and, have big personalities too.
Yes, that's so true. Oh my goodness. Yeah, absolutely. And also a little bit materialistic. Like I actually love Charlotte as a character, and I really wish she had like a spin-off where she gets her happy ending. But I agree. They've got like kind of some similarities there as well, which is that's really cool. I like that. And then I did have one more on the list for Mr. Elton, and that was Frollo from Hunchback of Notre Dame. Now, I don't in any way see Mr. Elton as severe as him, because this guy is nasty. So he's like an evil like priest, isn't he? Who like wants to get rid of like a certain set of people in society because he believes he's better than them. And I just thought that is very similar to the way that Mr. Elton behaves towards Harriet. That assumption that he's so much better than her, that it's actually disgusting to him that Emma would even think of them being together, and the way that he kind of shuns her in society, rejecting to dance with her and things, just makes me think he has that kind of arrogance and prejudice against people.
I really like that. Yeah, I see that a lot.
Yeah, I think that's it, definitely.
And they're both clergy members of the clergy.
Yes. Oh my gosh, that's such a clear link that I didn't even make, but yes, exactly.
I think it's like, Anglican and Roman Catholic, but still close. I think it's so interesting with Jane Austen's father being a clergy member, but I feel like, and from what I understand, Jane Austen was fairly religious, but I think that she had a very clear view of what was actually sticking to the principles of her beliefs, and she really saw all of the fake people, the people who are pretending. And I love how she brings that out. I mean, it's not even just in the clergy, it's with everything. What she does so beautifully is she can say that, there are really good people who maybe have this quality, like Elizabeth Bennet versus Mary Crawford. You can be sassy and you can kind of like not care about the rules, but one person can have more of a good heart and one person not. And I love how she does that, with everything. We've got Mr. Collins. I just think it's so interesting though, because her father was a clergy member, how many priests or ministers she's always skewering. But I think that she probably just saw a lot of maybe he knew other clergy members, but I would just imagine she saw a lot of people being fake.
Yes. And you're not actually the first person to say this. So like people always seem to sit there and they're just like, I don't believe she didn't hate her father. Like I've never read anywhere that it seems she had a pretty good relationship with him. So yeah, I think you're right. I think she just uses it as like a reflection of like human nature and the way that people can use fronts to try and cover up like who they really are. I think she's so good at doing that, just showing like actually what's on the surface level isn't necessarily people's truest characters, but their true character will come out and they will kind of be outed in a sense and they won't win.
Well, and I read something about that, her father, I've read multiple Jane Austen biographies, and they always mention about her father really cared about education for women. And it sounds like he was very forward thinking. So it sounds like while he was a member of the clergy, maybe he had some progressive ideas, and Jane Austen had some progressive ideas. Because I just found this out recently. I didn't know this, but she actually wrote a whole bunch of prayers, and you can actually get like a book of her prayers. And I had no idea she even wrote things like that. But so I feel like she must have had some, I think she was probably kind of critiquing, I guess, from within, probably the hypocrisy that she saw. But I think that's fascinating.
Yeah, I didn't know about that either. Maybe just because like I'm not like religious in a sense, so I've not like searched those things out. But I did see it because I went to Winchester Cathedral, and I think in the shop they had like a set of like Jane Austen prayers or something. So I was like, oh yeah, that is interesting that she must have like written that. It kind of makes sense though, doesn't it? It's a little bit like nowadays if somebody was like a writer but then also like wrote some songs or poems or something. I suppose it's quite similar. Like it would have been like a quick outlet that you could have done. Yeah. Like quick creative outlet.
I think it was just, it was so much more common back then. And, with her father, growing up with her father, I think it's just, but I just think it's interesting, her ability within any circle or any kind of person, that she could just zero in on that hypocrisy and call it out. And I think that really works so well with your Mr. Elton and Frollo connection, because I feel like that's what the Hunchback of Notre Dame is doing. They're calling out his hypocrisy, that the people like Esmeralda or Quasimodo are actually better people. The outcasts are better people than the priest character in this movie.
So true. Oh my gosh. Yay. That was a good one though. Okay. So do you have any separate ones for Mrs. Elton?
I don't, because I just came up with the Evil Queen and Magic Mirror thing. So
which I loved, by the way, That was awesome. So I did have a couple for Mrs. Elton separate. So one on the list was the Queen of Hearts. And that was actually the Queen of Hearts with her husband, who's that tiny little man who follows her around.
So good.
So I was like, what made me think of this is I believe Mr. Knightley makes a comment to Emma, which is Mr. Elton was made smaller by marrying Mrs. Elton. And that's what made me think of this link, because I was like, that's actually so true. Mrs. Elton's such a big character that Mr. Elton just becomes an even smaller man, or at least it shows his small mind qualities being with Mrs. Elton. And I just think she's so ridiculous. And that's a little bit like the Queen of Hearts as well.
Yeah, I love it. I think that's absolutely perfect. And she, she doesn't have that temper, the off with your head kind of thing overtly. I feel as if boiling under the surface, she definitely gets really irritated at people and really mad when she's not given her due respect. And so I would imagine inside her mind, she's probably saying off with her heads all the time.
Yeah, 100%. Like it's that when she doesn't get the attention that she thinks she deserves, which is very similar to the Queen of Hearts. Like, I think Box Hill's a really good example of that. Like she makes like snarl comments to Emma because Emma's getting a lot of attention that day. And I think, I agree. I think deep down she'd definitely want to take Emma's head off for sure.
Well, and even if you think about it, how the Queen actually likes Alice at first, I think that it's sort of similar. Like she seems to want to be friends with Emma at first, but then also when she can't control her, it's like that's when she turns on her. But then in a way, she also kind of takes in Jane Fairfax in that similar sort of like, oh, you poor thing, I'm the Queen, and I'll take you in as long as you play the game by my rules.
Yes, so true. Yeah, no, that's such a good link as well. And
I love that.
And then I just had like one more on the list for Mrs. Elton. That was Cruella Deville, and that was basically because of how weird Mrs. Elton is about certain things. Like she's like, so weird. My sister's got a brand new barouche. Like she's just so materialistic, and I think that's like in kind of over the top with it. And I think that's so similar to like Cruella Deville, where she's desperate to have all this fur. She's quite eccentric and just a bit of like an odd person that you probably wouldn't want in your house. You'd be like, oh my gosh, when's she gonna leave, kind of thing. Kind of similar to Mr.
You say that, and it's so interesting. I swear I read something maybe it was in my notes in my Oxford edition of Emma. I cannot remember, but I swear that there was something saying that there are little allusions, if you look between the lines, that her family's money came from like the islands where their slavery was still allowed or something like that. So if you think about it, like Cruella's like weird, crazy thing with the puppies, like really scary, like connections, that's like almost a similar kind of thing, that like a really cruel connection to the way that her family got their money.
Oh my gosh. You know, that wouldn't surprise me. I feel like in a lot of Austen's books, she really I feel like she really emphasizes that she thinks people who were involved with the slave trade and slavery weren't very nice people, because I feel like that really comes through in Mansfield Park, all the how toxic it is, the family, because all of their money comes from slavery as well. Like I feel like Austen definitely between the lines really speaks to her views on that.
Yeah, I think so too. And I swear, if I am wrong, I may be wrong, but I swear when I was the last time I read Emma that there was like a little note that I saw that it was making those connections. But if not, it wouldn't surprise me, because Mrs. Elton does have that kind of like cruel streak like Cruella.
Agreed. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, fab. That was good. Okay, so that's the first two down. And the only other one I have on my list for Emma is Frank Churchill. I'm really excited about Frank Churchill because I feel like I got some like good ones that I was like excited about. But you go first. You tell me who you got for Frank Churchill.
Well, I always think of like the whole Hans thing again, because he tries to trick Emma into thinking that he likes her, just in the same way that Hans tries to trick Anna into thinking that he likes her. I feel like Hans and Gaston were like just inspired by all the Austen men. Well, not all the Austen men, of course, but all the Austen villainous men. But a more unusual one that I had was Dr. Facilier from The Princess and the Frog, because he's full of metaphorical magic tricks and he makes things appear other than what they are. And I feel like that's what Frank Churchill is. He's a game player, he's a magician, he's kind of a con artist. He's got all this magic, metaphorical magic up his sleeve to make everyone think that he likes Emma when he really likes Jane, and the little word game that he plays. Like he's doing all of these metaphorical little sleights of hand. So I thought that worked well with him.
I love that. That's awesome. I did not think of that one at all, but I really like it. It's so true. I love what you said, the sleight of hand. That is absolutely Frank Churchill. He's constantly thinking of ways that he can kind of, cover up his secret. It's like secret after secret, isn't it? I mean, he must have been exhausted. Yeah. No wonder he had like that stress out that day when they went to pick strawberries, because the amount of like secrets and lies he was trying to keep hold of is ridiculous. It must have been like so exhausting. I can't even imagine. So yeah,
and he's just kind of constantly glamoring everybody in the town, his father. He's just kind of always putting that glamoring magic on everybody.
And yeah, all of the consequences of what he's doing is constantly on his back, which again is really similar to Dr. Facilier, that he's got those his friends on the other side, like constantly watching him and being like, this is all going to backfire on you if you don't sort it out. And I feel like, obviously Frank doesn't suffer consequences really for what happens, but I can imagine that he has that thing like over his shoulder being like, if this doesn't work out, this is what's going to happen, or these are the consequences of what you could do here.
Yeah, exactly. I agree. I mean, in a way, Jane Fairfax is the only person who really knows all of his lies. And so while she's like the person that he's in love with, and she does love him, she's also probably that person kind of like, what are you doing? Because that all kind of explodes at the Box Hill. Is it the Box Hill picnic where that kind of all explodes?
I think it's a strawberry picking again. I think they bump into each other at the strawberry picking.
Yeah, and I think that is kind of like she knows, like she's the only person who knows what he's doing, and it's kind of destroying their relationship from the inside. And even though he's trying to save their relationship, just like Dr. Facilier is trying to like save himself, or he's out for himself, it's just sort of like the things that you're doing are actually like causing your own destruction, or keeping you from getting what you want.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I love that. Okay, should I tell you mine?
Yes, I would love to hear yours.
Okay, I feel like I've taken a slightly different approach, and this is only because I struggle to see Frank as a full-on villain. And I know some people really dislike him, really hate him for how he is with Jane, and I slightly struggle to see him that way, because I feel like it more comes from a place of immaturity as opposed to malicious. I don't think he's malicious in the sense that like Wickham is, and I don't know if he's as money hungry as Willoughby, but I think he is immature, and I think he is cautious that the wealth that he has isn't secure, because obviously he had to go and stay with his aunt, and I do think from an extent as well, he's thinking, actually, for me to marry Jane, I actually do need to hold on to that money. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to marry Jane, because Jane comes from nothing.
Yeah.
So I don't think he's malicious like some of the other like villain men. But I do think he has this kind of like darker side and hurts people. He's just foolish and hurts people because he doesn't think things out properly. So my first link to Frank Churchill is Jack Skellington from Nightmare Before Christmas.
Oh, that's great. I like that.
So he's seen as like the good one, and he is technically like the protagonist of the film, but he actually hurts a lot of people in what he's doing, and he doesn't even realize. And he's like really popular, like Frank is. And he kind of controls what people end up doing. So very similar to Frank in the ball, he kind of dictates some things that's going on. And that's very similar to Jack in the town. Like he obviously tries to convince everybody to like make it kind of a second Christmas town. They're kind of like similar in the way that they can like manipulate the people around them. But then also I found like Jack loves like a quieter, talented woman, who he doesn't listen to because he still just goes off and does his own thing, and she just is there like in the background supporting him. And that's really similar to like Jane, like the fact that Frank loves Jane and she's in the background there supporting him. She's very talented, but she is quieter. And I feel like the extrovertedness of Frank overpowers Jane at times. And I think that's really the same as Jack. And I'm trying to think, I can't remember what her name is now. Sally. Yes. Oh my goodness. That's so right. I couldn't remember that.
I could see a lot in common with Jane and Sally. Like that. I could really see that. That's so good.
Yeah. So I thought that was my first link, which I was like, I was like, I could see that being the case. And then my second one was Peter Pan. And
yes.
So I took some elements of this because I feel like, yes, Peter Pan again is a protagonist, but there's a lot that Peter Pan does that's really not good at all and not nice. And if you read the original book, it's actually much darker, and he's said to be like knocking off all the lost boys and stuff. So the original like book is actually really dark. But even the Disney one, I think, really shows that Peter Pan isn't necessarily this good person. So he's not perfect. He is childish. He flirts with other girls around him and upsets and makes people jealous. So And when the mermaids try to drown Wendy, like he thinks that's really funny. And I think that's so similar to like stuff that Frank does, that he thinks things are funny and they're not funny. It's just you being immature. And then the other link that I had with him was I thought that Tiger Lily was a little bit like Emma, and like she's the princess in like on Neverland.
Yes.
And Peter flirts and has loads of fun with Tiger Lily, but he doesn't realize how much that actually upsets Wendy. And Wendy's there like getting really upset about it, and Peter just is carrying on flirting with Tiger Lily, and she like kisses him and stuff, and Wendy's like getting infuriated by it. And I thought that's so similar to the way that Frank Churchill is with Emma. Emma's this, basically the princess of Highbury, and Wendy's this newcomer, like Jane is this newcomer into the town, and Wendy's sat on the sidelines looking at what's happening, and she's devastated. And that's really similar to Jane, especially at Box Hill, where she has to watch on as Frank flirts with Emma, and there's nothing she can do about it. One, because it's a secret, but two, even if it wasn't a secret, would she make a fuss about it in that kind of society when everybody there loves Emma?
Oh my gosh, I love that. That might be one of the best ones so far, the Peter Pan. Oh my gosh. It makes so much sense because Wendy has so much in common with Jane. She's just very sweet. And I mean, I know that Wendy maybe has a little bit more of a spunkier personality, but I don't know. I love it. It's just great. She's being banished to the nursery. Like Jane is going to be banished to be a governess. If she does not. Yeah, this is good. I like it.
Yeah. So I think like Frank isn't my like the villainous of villains, but I think that lucky enough that there's in Disney, there are some protagonists that are a little bit maybe villainous, a little bit immature, and it causes problems.
Yeah, I see that. And I feel that way about Frank too. I feel like I at least admire the fact that he did marry the woman that he loved. And I do think that he loves Jane, but oh my gosh, I don't think that marriage is going to be very happy because of, unless he really, really grows and changes, because he is definitely a Peter Pan.
Literally, I personally would not be putting up with that. That would not be happening at all.
No.
I can't even imagine. But yeah, I don't know. It'd be interesting to see. Maybe he grows up in marrying Jane. I don't know. And also, I'd love to know what actually happened when they met at like Weymouth, like what their story was.
Me too.
Because I can't see them having much in common. So I'm so confused what they bonded over.
And maybe it was just the fact that he was so charming and teasing and all of those sorts of things. And she's a little bit more introverted. And maybe he just kind of like brought out her playful side. I'm sure there are people who have written books about their relationship. I feel like I've heard about, all those different kind of spin-off Jane Austen books. It would be really interesting though to know what Jane actually thought about that relationship. And that makes me actually think about, have you ever read this book? It's called The Jane Austen Guide to Dating. And I hate all the modern stuff because I'm not really interested in dating books, but it's actually written by someone who studied courtship, I think in graduate school. And so I think it was sort of like a way for them to sell a book, to be like, I'll add on all these like modern dating like things. But those sections that are just about the Jane Austen characters, she analyzes like the bad relationships and the good relationships. And there's a whole interesting section in that book about Jane and Frank Churchill. And I love that this author really points out how Jane shows us what makes a good relationship and what's going to make a bad relationship, and how people can make each other better or make each other worse. And then I find that fascinating with all of the relationships in Austen's novels.
Oh my gosh, that sounds so good though. Literally.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
It really is. Like, even if you don't want anything with like the dating, like I skipped over the little parts that are like, here's how you could put this into application. I just literally read the analyses of the characters. And it's been such a long time since I read it, but I remember that there was a lot of interesting analysis about how Frank Churchill doesn't quite make the mark. Like, it was kind of saying like in real life, this would probably not work out very well long term.
No, absolutely. Yeah, 100%. I definitely couldn't put up. But then maybe I can say like I wouldn't put up with that because I've read Austen and I'm like, actually, would I want a Frank Churchill or would I want a Mr. Darcy? And what am I willing to put up with? You know what I mean?
Exactly.
But yeah, maybe we learn our lessons from Jane and we're like, this is good and this is bad. And I'm not ready to settle for a Frank. So
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I totally get that. Great. So that wraps up Emma. That was everybody on my list for Emma. So that is another Disney Times Austen episode wrapped up, and we will be back with the next installment. I think it's going to come out after Halloween because I've got some Halloween inspired content prepared for you guys. But the next book on the list is Persuasion, and here is a preview of that episode. First character I have on the list for Persuasion is Sir Walter Elliot.
Also, I thought of Yzma from The Emperor's New Groove.
Yeah, he's a tough one. I feel like we don't know enough about him.
How scandalous to work for a living.
Captain Hook is emotionally vulnerable, he's self-centered, eccentric, stuck in the past, which I think is really similar to Sir Walter Elliot.
A Prince Charming thing on the surface until you read the book a little further.
Elizabeth, she very much mirrors her father.
I love that. That's a great one. I never would have thought of that one.
Right, thanks. Head over to my Instagram at What the Austen for all the updates, and for all of Anne's info that will be in the bio, so go ahead and check all of her content out. Her YouTube stuff is great, and also on Instagram as well. So I will see you in the next episode.